Hello, do you hear me? Come.
Testing, testing. Steph, where are you?
Oh yeah, that works.
Hello.
Hi guys. Welcome to our Norwegian Brotherhood here. So we have some Norway representation. So if the first participants of the panel could take their seat, I would like to say a few words. It's a pleasure to welcome everybody to, today's live moment. Which is entitled Travel Agency, which is a discussion on the ideas surrounding a collective project that is speculating on the future of the tourism industry in a post-petroleum economy, Norway. On behalf of the Berlage and the thesis teaching team, it's a pleasure to welcome you. To our viewers online, I would like to give the floor to our moderators who will introduce this. Maybe just before that, to sum this up a little bit, we have developed a collective project that has 13 individual contributions that are then ex post facto categorized into, let's say, 3 thematic sessions. So the purpose of today is not to discuss the individual contributions to this collective project, but more the meta ideas behind each of these projects, and to discuss how the ideas of each of our students have a relevancy in the real world and the future of Norway. At any rate, I give the floor now to our students, to our moderators, Steph Dingen and Michael Tia. So, thank you. The floor is yours.
Okay, I'm switching to this one then for this moment. Welcome everybody, those in this room, those watching the live stream, and of course our guests on the screen zooming in today. As you can see, we ourselves, our students and teaching staff, are in the faculty today, a rarity allowed for this special moment. Generation 30's final presentation here at the Berlage. Part of the program has always been to transfer the ideas within our projects to a larger audience and to engage with the broader world. And this year, of course, is no exception. My name is Steph Dingen, one of the contributors to today's Project Travel Agency, and I'm joined by Michael Chia, who is one of the students of the next generation of Berlage students, who was started only 6 months ago. As Salomon just told, today's conversations form the concluding part of our collective thesis project that we've been working on for the better part of the last 10 months. Our collective project Travel Agency examines architecture's role in relation to the tourism industry in Norway. You might see that we've tried to mimic a kind of travel agency setting here in the faculty. We are sitting in a travel agency, but moreover, we are actually looking at the agency of travel. Although it has been clear for a while that the tourism industry has an enormous impact on the world, both positive and negative. Our current health crisis have underlined once more that there's probably no economic sector that has been impacted so much by something as this crisis we're in. It's also because of Corona that we haven't been able to travel to Norway. So even though we were working on a project on traveling and tourism, we ourselves have not had the opportunity to actually go there. Of our group, only a few have actually set foot in Norway. So obviously, while our project does not directly address Corona as such, it has colored both our experience of this project and the way we have looked at Norway. The Agency of Travel is explored through 13 contributions, each of which are placed within a collective framework that proposes a vision for Norway as it moves away from petroleum production. Over the past few decades, Norway has amassed great wealth because of its oil and gas extraction, but it is clear that times are changing and that there is a new ambition away from petroleum. Travel and the tourism industry to us seems to be a likely new economic focal point. So although we are not necessarily talking about each of the 13 contributions directly, through 3 itineraries or panel discussions, we address all sorts of themes that underlie these projects. The first conversation will center on the earlier mentioned move away from petroleum. The second conversation will explore the balance between economic gain on the one hand and tourism's impact on the landscape on the other. And then finally, we have a discussion that considers the various facets of working tourism. For each conversation, a guest will be joining virtually via Zoom. For the first discussion, we have Jürgen Thunberg and Jonas Norstedt joining. Annette Gigon will join for the second conversation. And then finally, Oana Stanescu will join for our third and final session today. For now, I would like to thank our advisory team. Most of them are here today. Salomon Frausto, Ludo Groen, Benjamin Groothuizen, Philip Geerts, and Michiel Riedag, as well as various contributors to our project, including, amongst others, Lea Katrien Jatska, Sanne van der Bremer, and many, many others. Now, before we start with our first panel discussion, I'll shortly introduce our 2 guests that are joining for this first session. Jürgen Thunberg first. For our first panel discussion, we have Jürgen Thunberg joining. After studying architecture at the AA, Jürgen himself has been part of the Berlage. Currently, he has his own practice in Oslo, where he's also an associate professor at the Oslo School of Architecture and Design. Someone in our destination country, he will no doubt bring a sense of Norway with him. Then secondly, we are joined by a second Norwegian, Jonas Norstedt. Jonas is one of the founding partners of Atelier Oslo, noted for the recently opened Deichman Library in Oslo. For over 10 years, Jonas has been teaching at the Oslo School of Architecture, and he too has been a part of the Berlage before. Now, we start our first itinerary, an itinerary for Norway's post-petroleum economy. While the petroleum industry is still an essential pillar supporting Norway's prosperity today, forecasts predict that oil and gas production will have been halved by 2050. In anticipation of the decrease of petroleum-related industries, the Norwegian government launched a strategy titled Green Competitiveness to compensate for the loss of petroleum jobs with sustainable alternatives. Essentially, the country is buying off its green guilt with dirty oil money while bracing itself for impending economic stagnation. The tourism industry is a likely focal point for economic development and one that intimately links to Norway's petroleum past. How then can architecture play a role in rethinking the Norwegian tourism industry and thereby building a post-petroleum economy? How do we organize transportation in a world without fossil fuels? What kind of infrastructures does it require? And how does that affect our traveling experiences? How can the legacy of the petroleum industry in the form of knowledge, skill, and pieces of infrastructure be used to the advantage of tourism industry? Do you want to take over? Yes. Do we have to clean this?
Can I just say something? Do you hear me? Sorry. Yes, we hear you. Sorry.
Okay, good. Because sometimes the sound is very bad, so it's difficult for us to hear what you're saying. But if you just try to say something, we can tell if we don't hear.
Are we clear now, or is it difficult to hear?
It's better now. Yes. But
Okay.
it was hard to hear the introduction.
I hope you've been able to follow some of it.
I recognize my own name.
Same.
I mean, I can recapitulate. We start in our first session talking about Norway as it moves away from petroleum towards an economy in which tourism plays an important role. So we have 4 students here sitting, Siwon Wang, Genchehu Juan Benavides, and Marco Fusco, who each have, in our own way, have dealt with topics related to this transition. So we would like now to discuss themes underlying that future scenario for Norway, in particular relating tourism to a certain past in petroleum. Thank you. So maybe to kick things off and to start with a theme that we saw in some of the contributions was there is an existing infrastructure related to petroleum economy in the form of, for example, oil rigs, which get second lives or can do something. So maybe to start the conversation, how can we use this existing infrastructure related to the petroleum industry and rethink those infrastructures to favor tourism?
Hello? Do you hear me? Yes? Okay. Yeah, so I just wanted to maybe before we really get into what could be the second use of these rigs, whether we consider that possible or not. Also, I think that maybe the attention should be primarily focused on this infrastructure and what does it take to then give actually a second life or to just dismantle them completely, because that is an enormous venture, and I don't think it's people really realize how much it takes to then get rid of all this that it's basically now necessary. Also because we've seen how renewable energy has failed to kind of replace the old way, the old system of basically producing power. And yeah, it's really not an easy issue, but it's definitely, I think, an issue that should be tackled and should be addressed it's very soon, because time is kind of running out. So I just wonder, from your perspective, being a region, what do this infrastructure mean to you? Also as architects, what do they represent, and how do you see them?
Would you like to start, Jørgen, or should I start?
You decide. I can start. I have something actually on my mind. Because first of all, I really enjoyed this project with the oil platform, and thank you also for inviting me. I remember when I was at the Berlage myself, I wrote an essay actually about this project by 51N4E, the sea mine, which is a sort of cultural production facility in Genk, I think, which is based in an all-electrical factory or something like this. So it's actually touching upon some of the same subjects, but in a different, almost in a different era already, because it's about post-Fordist industries taking over the facilities of old Fordist production. And so I think this issue of how we reuse the facilities of each the previous economy will always be an issue, but also how we reframe it to become architecture in a way. And I think, I mean, Jonas has probably actually done some projects that touch upon this subject that he can talk about afterwards. But the ways in which you manage to make it something more than just to reuse of a facility and actually give it an architectural value, I think is one of the main questions. Iñaki Avalos, he wrote something interesting that he says that only if there is an architectural debate, if there is an idea of beauty associated with sustainability, will the latter be able to appeal to architecture in a non-circumstantial way and will encourage architects to work on it. And I think this is true also for myself in a way. So I think this is maybe what I did like about this oil platform project, was the way in which it managed to reframe somehow the old facilities and give it a new use, but also maybe with a symbolic aspect to it. That somehow gave it not just a new functional life, but also managed to recontextualize it in a good way. And I think, I mean, I don't have a better answer than this to an open question, but I think this was something that I really enjoyed. Yeah.
Yeah, I also think it's a very exciting idea to what is today's ruin, so to speak. In Oslo, where we are both living, Jørgen and me, it's kind of hard to find ruins because the economy has been so good the last 30 years. So almost every spot of the city has already been taken. So one could ask, what is today's ruin? Where can you start to let's say, interfere in new ways, come up with totally new programs, do unexpected things, so to speak. And I think this is a great idea to start such a discussion. And of course, it's something very different from a ruin, although it's kind of worn out and out of date. It still has nothing to do with the 200-year-old stone piece, and I think also this, both the mythical aspect of the whole oil industry and platforms, but also the place itself, how to imagine this place as not a place to work, but a place to be. I think it's very exciting.
Yeah, I mean, also because the way that this infrastructure were thought, they were merely thought for functional reason and technocratic reasons. So they're just supposed to do the job, and that was it. So there was never a moment when, I guess, when they were thought as to be lived from the community, because yeah, they're just staying there offshore. I don't think anybody here has ever been on an oil platform because we're not supposed to be there. Yeah, so that I personally found that very intriguing, and also to the potential symbolic aspect that could have. Would you agree on that? And let's say how also I'm also very curious to kind of understand what is the symbolic aspect to the Norwegian. Like, let's say, Norwegian people, do they consider them as kind of monuments because they did represent a big part of the history they did make Norway what it is now?
I think I can only speak for myself, but I guess many will have a quite ambiguous kind of feeling of this kind of oil industry and these extremely large installations. I mean, some of these oil platforms, they go down 100 meters, and they are among the largest concrete structures ever built. I mean, enormous infrastructural systems. But I think, I mean, in both, well, one could differentiate between the wealth and the kind of economy it has given Norway, and this amazing boom that this has represented. But it's also kind of scary. I mean, now Norway are criticized from all over to be a part of the petrol industry. And this also kind of represents something that we shouldn't do anymore. It's something totally wrong. It's, I mean, we should take care of our planet. We shouldn't destroy it, so to speak. And I mean, it's really represents both good and bad things.
I was well wondering, since there's a post-petroleum economy, that also means that there's a pre-petroleum economy.
Sir, can I just interrupt? Could you try to take your mouth or mic a little bit further away from your mouth? Maybe it will
Here,
help.
can you hear me well? Here,
Yeah. A
better,
little bit
better. Yeah.
Yeah.
Since we're talking about a post-petroleum economy, that also means that there's a pre-petroleum economy. So there has already been a transition of economies mid-20th century that was under a completely different cultural setting, a different well, understanding of the environment, of the harm, and there was also an existing infrastructure, perhaps belonging to fishing industry or extraction of minerals, stones, quarries. So if we were to, let's say, speculate on this different cultural setting in which we are placed right now, and since we have this well, existing infrastructure that will be rethought, there's a different understanding of landscape, of harm, of low impact, while maintaining, let's say, this high yield or economic security. So I'm wondering if we could speculate on could this be a smooth transition of economies? Could it be a harsh transition? So we were just to think on culturally, what would it mean for Norway to make this transition?
The transition from the oil economy to the post-oil economy.
Right.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you probably discussed the pension fund, the Norwegian, all the saving money of Norway. Did you?
Excuse me?
The saving, the pension fund.
Yeah, exactly. It's a huge amount of money.
In Norway, it's a very fortunate situation that they can actually spend a lot of money to boost all different kind of industries. And I think, I mean, a big part of doing the post-oil economy will also be to use those money. So I mean, I think it's very hard to say, but you know, all this oil money has always, or also made Norway kind of a lazy country, I would say, because we have had this industry that has been going very well, but it will be very interesting to see. I don't know if you have any comments on that, Jørgen.
No, I think, most Western economies, they don't just rely on selling one type of goods, you know, and so it's not really an untried or untested model to change to a different, let's say, national economy like that. But I do agree with Jonas that you could compare Norway to a slightly lazy person that will now have to get up off the couch in a way.
With a lot of money in the bank.
With lots of money in the bank, yeah. But I mean, an interesting thing, there are actually, you know, like Jonas is touching, there are government initiatives to stimulate local economies around Norway. There's, for example, what's called SIVA, which is a government agency that funds innovation centers that are supposed to be incubators for local businesses. And they both build and own buildings that are funded by the government to house local industry and local businesses. And so there are these types of initiatives coming from the government to stimulate local economies around Norway. What is interesting also, I mean, there are a lot of questions that we can touch upon that relate to this, and I actually had a question for you in regards to this, whether you touched upon in your studies the different types of conflicts of interest that you get around Norway, because what is interesting is this, let's see if I find this. What I was unaware of until I was brought in as part of a course that was teaching urban planning in small towns in Norway. And what I wasn't aware of until then, was that these small towns and rural areas, they actually compete with each other. They compete for business, they compete for investments, for government subsidies, and they also compete for people, fighting each other in a way in the battle against population decline. And so also in each small commune or each rural municipality shaping its own agenda, they're also quite weak when they have to negotiate with investors, because they have to allow investment in their town on, let's say, the investors' premises. Otherwise they will go somewhere else, and that also means that local Norwegian towns are somehow also becoming uglier and uglier. And so there was a project there that was the Ministry of Things or something, that video I watched yesterday, which was quite interesting, which should actually be, in a way, a ministry that manages to see the big picture and negotiate between local municipalities would be the best thing. So I was also wanting to ask you if this is something you discussed, let's say Norway not as a whole relying upon tourism, but as a tissue of local municipalities competing with each other for tourists and people. Because as soon as you start planning initiatives in one place, then you have to see what that place is in relation to its surroundings in a way. Whether you are taking something, giving it to that town or that place that actually a neighboring town was relying upon. And I've only seen a few other projects, so I don't know if this is something that you're interested in at all, but it is an interesting thing to discuss, basically this local tissue of communes competing with each other for business and people. And so in answer to your question, I think this is the main problem, or one of the main problems we are facing, is actually that these communes are competing rather than being put in the big picture.
Well, this idea of decentralization that you mentioned, on focusing on local and what is really necessary for each place and how can we tackle that, I think also has to do with the general organization of the political institutions. For example, and also the role of bureaucracy and how we handle this, or how it is decentralized. So in
very muffled in the sound. I don't know if it's the mic or if it's it's not your fault, probably. Just telling you.
Is it okay now?
Yeah, that's better.
Yeah. Okay. So on the 20th century, the bureaucratic institutions, or the institutions that we still have today mostly, or that political organization, used to have a great impact, where the pillars of the upheaval of states after the two world wars. So they were really specialized. But then it seems that the great work that those bureaucrats did on that time has had a detrimental impact on the environment. So now we move to this new ages, or the post-Anthropocene, where systems are interrelated. So for example, if you still have bureaucracy or ministries only tackling tourism issues, that they remain in their own bubble and they don't kind of, they cannot interfere with other systems or the environment and so on. So I wanted to ask you, how do you see Norway in this post-petroleum economy? Is there an initiative also on rethinking some institutions and some political organizations to smoothly maneuver this transition?
There are national initiatives in a way, like organizations or like government departments that are focusing precisely on the issue of moving into a post-petroleum economy. Was that the question?
Yeah. So, can you elaborate on how they are organized, or what is the strategic movement in Norway towards this?
I can tell a little bit how I am related to it. I guess there are many sectors that are reorganizing right now, but I don't know in Holland, but here in Norway, this kind of co-working and tech labs and all this kind of initiative to kind of start new small businesses in order to be the new Apple or the Microsoft or whatever is next. I think that's something really big here now, and it started maybe 5-10 years ago, and suddenly there are new schools popping up, and I guess it's this kind of search for the next new thing that could save the Norwegian economy, or at least kind of give us a kind of push us further. I think that's one thing that I say very clearly, because we are making all these kind of co-working places as architects. We are organizing how to work differently, new meeting spots and so on. And second, I think also it has been a lot, I mean, you are discussing tourism, of course, that is one thing, but also the fish industry. I think that's the next one, the big business that is kind of encouraged to kind of do a lot of research, that is also very strong and earning a lot of money, but it's a kind of big industry, and now they are building fish tanks on land to kind of breed fish to sell it all over the world. And I think this tech industry and the fish market, I guess that's something that has been more and more important, that people speak more and more about. I don't know if you have other topics, Jørgen, but I think at least for me, that's something that is kind of more and more occurring.
Yes. No, I mean, the fish industry was also what came to mind for me. But in a way, I don't know if there is this kind of major plan. In a way, I think there's many different initiatives, and I think maybe what is interesting about you having this course now is that there is this idea of the green shift. You know, that is not just on the national level, but within all the local municipalities around Norway. They do talk about how is Haugesund going to be a green town, and how is Kristiansand going to be a green town. You know, so they are thinking about this on a local level, but maybe what is the major national initiative? I'm not really sure. That could also be because Norway is normally ruled by coalition governments without a strong majority, you know, so everything is compromised in a way. which is good, but also has some downsides when it comes to sustainability and.
And you see that even in architecture, I would say.
Yeah.
The joy of compromising.
The joy of compromising, yeah, exactly. But I mean, when we are talking about like maybe I started talking about when we start talking about national initiatives, for example, then it is interesting also to touch upon this maybe increasing polarization or potential conflict between the large cities and the districts. Because when discussing how to live environmentally friendly, you know, the focus has always been on the cities and how can we live environmentally friendly. Well, we have to live in big cities because that is better for the environment and is more sustainable than living in a rural area. But we also know that this singular focus on the city is also a simplification of reality, because as long as you have people living in the district, then these people will be voters, and you will then have politicians that will sustain that way of living. And I'm not saying that that's bad, but I'm saying we should take it as given that people will continue to live in the district, and we need to think, how can we plan environmentally friendly small towns and rural areas? You know, the Center Party, which is really the party of the people from rural areas in Norway, is becoming larger and larger in Norway, and one of their slogans is "We put the whole country to use." You know, so they really want people to live all across the city and not all across the country, and not just within the larger cities. A famous Norwegian city planner, Røyne Kyllingstad, he once said that living in the rural area in a single family house is actually a very environmentally friendly way of living, as long as you never leave your house. And that's maybe a silly way of putting emphasis on the problems of transportation. That really, all of Norway is planned according to private car ownership. And if you live in a rural area, then you have to use your car to get to the shop, and you have to use the car to get from store to store, and so on. So it's not, it's very hard to think public transportation in most Norwegian small towns and rural areas. And that's not even starting to talk about the issue of transporting goods all around the country. So yeah, so in the master's course that I've been teaching here now, we take as a premise that people will continue to live all across the country. And this seems to be a trend also in architecture schools. I think that you see more and more courses focusing on rural areas and inhabiting larger parts of the country than just the cities. But it would also be interesting to hear your take about this, because you've been given the tourist industry as a premise for your assignment. And the tourist industry does somehow sustain local towns and local populations. But this, whether or not you manage to cut carbon emissions from the tourists themselves when they're traveling, the other part of it, or the backside, is that you have large rural areas with people living in a way unsustainably right now. And so it's not really about just cutting carbon emission from the tourism industry itself, but it's about the local populations sustaining the tourist industry or working in the tourist industry. They also have to live in a sustainable way. And so that was also one of my questions for you, and I started to think about it, was whether these are issues that you touch upon in your project. Yeah. I mean, I'm sure you have it, but if you want to talk about
it. Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Because I think we under the transitional period from petroleum to post-petroleum, or we can say the electricity period, it's kind of a development. We consider the technology is always developing and developing. And I don't think the development of technology should, no, I think the development of technology should bring us a better life quality. But sometimes in some area, it's the other way. Like we are developing, we are moved from petroleum to electricity, but actually the life quality is reducing, is decreasing. For example, in the area of electric cars, if you have a fossil fuel car, you can go whatever you want. You can fill up the gas anytime and almost any place. But if you do a road trip by electric car, like we do a road trip by electric car last month in Netherlands, like all the way we are looking for charging stations because the temperature is so low and the battery goes really fast. So we are really worried about the battery, and we cannot open the air condition. We even turn off all the music just to save some battery. I think this is not a good experience. So when we talk about the technology development, I think, yeah, we really need to consider both, like how your life quality and how we develop a way to protect the environment. We should not just consider, okay, we need to protect the environment and we sacrifice ourselves. I think Norway may be one of the most environment-friendly country. I just wondering what the people's opinion there. Do they, like they all think, okay, we should sacrifice something to protect the environment, or yeah, you have some other thoughts about this?
The people's opinion, like whether people want to live environmentally friendly, or what was the question again?
No, but I think maybe the audio was not perfect, but I think that actually Lam touched upon the real issue about this transition, which is, yes, okay, if there is an answer and that's going to solve it, it's not going to completely replace the quality of life that we have now with this completely polluting system that we have. And that's basically it. That's the issue right there. I remember Greta Thunberg, she was talking at the UN, she was talking about net zero, not really understanding what net zero means, which means that we will not only need to cut our emissions so that don't raise year by year, but we need to go back and diminish them. That's an extremely radical shift that we're gonna have, and it's some people call it involution, the opposite of evolution. So I get where Lam is coming from, because then we see it as progress, but then we also feel that we're going back because we're just lowering the quality of our life, basically.
Well, there's a green, I mean, the only politicians that speak about this are the Green Party in Norway. They have about 5% of the votes right now, and which means that 95% of the people are not so willing to do those sacrifices. I mean, to put it very bluntly. But I think the rest of the population will hope for some new magical technology for them to save their current lifestyle or even increase it. I think there are very few people that would actually like to give up the life we have now to go down in living standards, and maybe they will have to sooner or later, but right now I think it's a very unpopular kind of thought. Maybe among the young people it's okay, but I mean, if you are above 30, I think it's almost impossible to imagine.
I think that's a very good answer, because I think everyone's for saving the environment, but not so many people are willing to sacrifice their current way of living. And that's also always a question whether voters vote according to ethics or according to their own interests. Most often, I think it's according to what at least short-term goals or interests rather than long-term ones. And I think Jonas answered it really well. That the Green Party has a very small percentage of the voters right now. So not so many people are willing to sacrifice so much. Yeah.
Maybe since we're talking about Greta Thunberg, the UN, and the scale of the globe, basically, this group of students, or this group of the Berlage in general, we're a really international, maybe interdisciplinary group of people. Right now on these sofas, I think 5 nationalities are represented. I don't know, could you maybe perhaps reflect upon your own, let's say, experience as an international, as someone currently not in the country where you're from, studying another country where many of you have never been? And maybe if you look at this post-petroleum economy of Norway, how that fits in this, let's say, global movement that needs to occur if we're going to work on this together. I don't know, is there any one of you four that wants to respond to this first?
I'm afraid you will have to repeat the question. It was really hard to hear.
Oh, I'm sorry. Please interrupt me if I'm just curious, because this is a very international group of students.
I don't know, maybe the microphone try it a bit further away or something. Yeah. Oh, yeah.
I'm a bit at a loss about what I can improve. Is this better?
Yeah.
Yes, it's better. So more distance.
More distance better, yeah.
You don't hear this, but we're being briefed off camera. No, that's great. The more input we get on how to improve that's better. No, I was just reflecting upon the fact that so we have 5 nationalities here right now represented on these sofas, and many more on the tribune. And as an outsider looking into the Norwegian case, I'm wondering what kind of peculiarities or unique situations they have sensed while doing this project, and maybe one of you can reflect on this. Marco, perhaps?
Well, I mean, if I had to just completely term the project in my country, which is Italy, it wouldn't work that much, because, I mean, we're actually kind of jealous, no, of Norway having this much health, having this much oil, and it's, yeah, I thought it was the perfect example to kind of bring in this issue. But of course, the issue's not only there. We can talk about basically anywhere in the world. But this, because the thing is that the petroleum business, it's fundamentally, it's a system, it's a business model that privatizes profit while socializing the causes, and that's the big issue. And yeah, I was just looking at what Texaco, what Texaco made, all the consequences, environmental consequences that there were in Ecuador and in Amazon forest. That was a complete cruel crime against basically humanity, because that's environmental crime, and nobody was persecuted for that, neither people nor companies, because if I'm not wrong, they bankrupted. And And I think that's really the issue there. It's really the symbol of, yeah, capitalism there. And it's really hard. I personally, honestly, don't have an answer to all this, but it is my concern. I hope it would be a concern of more and more people. Yeah.
I think this situation in China and in Europe will be really different because all the countries now frequently discuss about the transition from petroleum to electricity. They are all developed countries because they are developed, so they don't have to, very urgent to develop more. But as China is still developing, so if you put the same standard with developed country and developing country as China, this is not fair because you have already consumed a lot of fossil fuel things in the past 100 years. So we should not treat all the countries with the same standard, I think. Yeah, and also for the electric cars, I think, because the future of electric cars is really unclear. I think in China there are a lot of options. For example, we change battery, or we have huge battery to make you can go 1,000 kilometers, so you don't have to charge every day. So it's quite unclear, and it's still under experiment. So it's hard to say where is the future and which direction it will go.
Anyone else here who wants to respond? There's a question in the audience, and a mic will go there.
I don't know. Do you hear me? Fine? It's more a reflection maybe than a question, but especially in reference to the Troll platform project in relationship to this transition predicament. I think the particularity of that project is that it shows somehow, or that it puts the emphasis on the legacy of that previous complex. And strangely enough, therefore, it sort of subtly points at the problem of the legacy of any system. And therefore, it could also be read as being an indicator of the possible future problematic legacy of all these fantastic new technologies that also Norway is championing in the sense that, let's say, the kind of, how do you call it, the dark side of the coin, right? The batteries, the kind of issue of exploitation, no longer extraction in your own territory or national territory or economic exploitation zone, but elsewhere in the world. So I think it's interesting to sort of emphasize the issue of legacy in general, facing that previous economic industrial model as a sort of warning of, the problems we are creating now, while within the framework of solving things. So I think there is this interesting kind of hybridity, and I think Norway is a kind of privileged case to well, at least to be able, with the luxury of, let's say, asking this kind of difficult question. So that's what I, kind of something that I think should be also on top of the discussion, that there will be another transition, right? It's never the kind of final model, I would say. So therefore, we have to imagine what the next transition of in whatever 100, 150 years, when the lithium runs out or something like that, right? Anyways.
What you're saying in a way is that new technologies will always become obsolete, so we have to plan for that obsolescence already. But I think what is also interesting to think about is, you can say that Norway is in a very privileged position, and we are, but that also relies upon, let's say, political will and political power to act. And so it's a question of whether there are actually someone willing and capable to push forward any initiatives that might let us utilize this privileged position that we are in, and that is a more difficult question.
Jonas, would you like to respond?
Yes, I think I agree with the last comment that, well, this is not a definite kind of step or kind of end stop of a kind of thinking process. It's more like an evolution where things will happen more organically, and of course things will develop. In 5 years we can meet again, and probably the scene is totally different. And I think, I mean, I was speaking about the oil oil savings of Norway. It's a very interesting discussion, because you see what happened with the large tobacco industry in the United States, that it's being now sued from a lot of people all over the world, and they have to kind of return a lot of their money back to kind of undeveloped countries, places that are kind of suffering from all the tobacco incidences. And somehow one could imagine the same charges being held against Norway. I mean, we have all those money in the bank. I mean, who does those money really belongs to? I mean, should it be a kind of global fund that to save the Maldives or save some islands, or should it only belong to the Norwegians and kind of spent to the tourist industry in Norway? I mean, I guess the question is quite simple, and I would just like to share a film with you, but you don't need to see it right now. But I think it's a very good argument that that we are all sitting in the same boat, and I think the oil industry of Norway, the positive and the negative sides, I mean, it affects us all. I mean, it's not a part of Norway alone.
I just quickly was checking if this video which you sent was something we could watch at now, but maybe it's indeed for another moment. We're coming, looking at the clock, and we're coming a bit to the end of this first itinerary. I think it's safe to say that this is like we haven't reached the destination yet, to just drop another one of these cliches, but I think it's really true. Is there anyone who wants to have like one last remark or response here? I'm looking at the people on the sofa, and they're all shaking no. And then I'm looking, well, Gent, sorry.
Yeah, well, it's interesting to mention that we all are on the same boat. And now, at the beginning, you also mentioned this transition or importance of the fishery industry in Norway. But it's interesting to think that I believe most of the income from the fisheries, from the fishery industry, comes from transportation. And that transportation in itself is also polluting. So Although it seems that fishery industry is safer than the oil extracting, it still has its systemic impacts on the environment. And I wonder if these things are discussed and politicized in Norway.
Yes, very much indeed. I mean, it's polluting a lot, and there are a lot of kind of science being put into this, how to make it more environmental friendly. But still, of course, I mean, they have been using medicines, the products that they're feeding the fish with comes from Brazil. I mean, it's like, it's a fishy industry. But yeah, I think it's a business that little by little it will develop. But of course, until now, it's a lot of horrible things that has been following the fish.
Well, on that note, we would like to thank Jonas and Jürgen very much for a very interesting conversation. Applause, people. Applause.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you for being good sports is being screamed to the students. And a final applause. Thank you. Welcome back to our second panel discussion this afternoon. We are welcoming into this session Annette Guijon. For our second conversation, we have Annette Guijon joining. She studied... Hello.
Hello,
Do you
everybody.
Can you
Sorry,
hear?
I think I'm too late. Excuse me.
That's all right. Can you hear me right now? Am I clear?
I can hear you. I can hear you. Thank you very much.
Good. I'm going to introduce you first to our guests and people looking from home. For a second conversation, we have Annette Guijon joining. She studied architecture at the ETH in Zurich, where she currently holds her own chair of architecture. Annette is also co-founder of the architecture practice Guion Gaia in Zurich, with extensive experience in a challenging landscape and perhaps similar to that of Norway. I'm sure she will have some interesting insights in regards to this conversation. This second conversation of the day, we've called it an itinerary for high economic yield with low impact on the landscape. The geology of Norway, consisting of countless fjords, mountains, and islands, has long informed how Norwegians live and work. Likewise, in the tourism industry, relying to a great extent to domestic tourism, is intimately linked to the country's characteristic geological formation. A history of nomadism, a tradition of outdoor recreation, and a high standard of living courtesy of a flourishing economy have contributed to a widespread culture of second homes and touristic expenditure across Norway, thereby also affecting the landscape. Following the global pandemic, a renewed interest in non-urban homes around Norway and the world has exacerbated the necessity of considering the impact of the second home, now perhaps a first home. How can architecture ensure that this impact of tourism on the landscape is minimized while also warranting high economic yields? How can we rethink what it means to go to the countryside in a second home culture? What is the role of transportation? What other yields are to be considered in relation to landscape?
And if I may, I'd like to ask the first question. Annette, assuming you're in Switzerland now, could you confirm, are you indeed in Switzerland?
Well, actually, acoustics are not too good at the moment because there's some noise in my house going on, and there's some...
It could be us as well, but I wanted to ask if there's a comparison to be made in this second home culture, a culture between Norway and Switzerland, and if you could reflect on this.
Yeah, well, I guess also in Switzerland there is a high tendency to have second homes. Unfortunately, I do not. I do not have a second home, but I think there is a tendency to even increase the number of second homes, although there has been voting against the rise of more second homes in the Alpine cantons in order to keep the landscape more beautiful. And it was very much against the will of the Alpine cantons and very much steered by the city cantons, the big cantons like Zurich and Bern, who voted for it. So I think it's a kind of issue of well-to-do countries have this tendency to have to give their people, to give the population the possibility not to be only to make holidays in hotels or to fly to different destinations, but to have a second home in the vicinity of their own homes. And of course, it goes with that the problem of landscape, which is well, at least used for it, even diminished by it, and it goes with it the more use of fuels, no doubt, and it goes with it the problem of also more gray energy to build it. This is a kind of basic elements there, but of course also it goes with it, and this is the positive things about in architecture, the possibilities of architects to build a small home where it can be kind of experimental materials can be used, or it can be used in a way that that there is less energy use. But nevertheless, it's a kind of luxury problem we have in Switzerland and in Norway, and maybe in many countries in Europe. So, and of course, it boosts also economy. This is the positive thing. So you will not have kind of easy answers about this solution or this problem. It is something which has to do with our well-doing economy and our high standard of living, and goes together with our high standard of using materials, fuels. You know, it's whenever we look into the mirror of our civilizations, it comes back that we are so much spoiled. And we are, very much aware of what we are doing, but nevertheless to come back to a usage of less landscape and less material flows and less fuels and less production of CO2. It is a kind of it's an uncomfortable look into this mirror, you know.
Thank you, Annette. We have Pipa here who would like to respond.
Yeah, can you hear me well?
Actually, it's kind of, I make the loudspeaker a bit louder, so maybe then it will be better. Yeah.
All right, because we were having a little trouble earlier, but I hope it's okay. I hope you can hear me. So with this issue of second homes, there was also with this COVID situation, there was a very high jump on the investment that people were doing about second homes, because of course they don't want to be stuck in a city, but they want to be in the countryside, stuck there and enjoy nature. And now the technology allows us to do our jobs remotely. And so now we're seeing the shift from the second home to becoming a first home. And that means, of course, taxation changes of the houses, but certain regulations go into that. Also what was before a small town and with very limited infrastructure has to develop and serve these people and assist the needs of these people. So I just wanted to know your take on this. What is the future of these landscapes, and how are they transformed by this new technology, this willing to leave the city and into nature, and the technology allowing us to do our job from wherever we want.
Yes, I think it's an interesting stop to have the second home becoming the first home, or maybe even the single home. And of course, Zoom and Teams and whatever, Cisco, WebEx, whatever technology will make it possible that we have less contact to cities. And I guess it's a movement which will even continue afterwards, after Corona crisis. I guess this is something which Corona showed all of us a kind of big leap into the future way of communicating, and not only having to travel a lot and to drive a lot. And I think this is something which we will take with us from this crisis, even when it's over, hopefully this year, in summer, hopefully at the latest, but we'll see.
perhaps also to add to this question, maybe the cultural changes that takes, of course, to have a remote home or cabin like how you used to have in Norway earlier, but now you have these almost suburbanized neighborhoods in the middle of the ski resorts, no? So how does this culturally change? Because as I was reading also, the second home changes from being a very family-based home to sort of like be a showcase of wealth, basically, where you invite your friends and you show them your cabin or your second home, your luxury second home.
Yeah, again, I think it's what you say, what you describe is a tendency. And as soon as we have this cabin equipped with all the technical needs which are necessary to communicate like we do now on Zoom, there is, of course, there is infrastructure needed, and not only electricity, but also water plumbing, canalization, and the way you get electricity. So it becomes a kind of suburban situation, and it is you know, it is kind of I guess it will improve the quality of life because you can choose where you want to work. Is it in the city or is it in your second home? Nevertheless, it will contribute immensely to the damage of the landscape. It will. So I think there is no way out, because you also need a place to put your car, or you can come by train, but who carries all the computer and all the stuff with him, with her, too long distances. So I think it should be in a way regulated from the community or from the state, how much we can do in order not to spoil nature in a way we did already intensively in the last years, in the last decades. Yeah, sorry to have no better news, but I think it's necessary to talk about this kind of double life we would have then also if the cabins are small, you know, again, it's an intervention into nature, and it has to have all these infrastructural elements. Otherwise, it wouldn't work just on time, you know, communication just on time.
Well, touching upon what you mentioned about how they get to nature, do you hear me well?
Yes.
Okay. Well, it's interesting to understand Norway as a country in which its population is quite located in the south. But nowadays, their aim to spread tourism in time and space is leading to a concentration of tourists in places that once were nearly empty. So, yes?
Yes.
Yeah. So they are becoming these popular tourist attractions. And how do you think could Norwegians cope with this transition of changing these popular tourist attractions, how these communities will change?
Look, I have been twice, 3, 4 times in Norway, short trips for lectures and tours and things like that. And what I can say is from the view of Switzerland, where we have quite a dense net of train. A train net in the landscape and in the cities, with also quite often many trains going through different destinations every day, every hour, every minute. The train is a very good alternative to individual traffic, to cars, to airplanes, whatever. Nevertheless, to get to the remote places with all the stuff, all the family, all the clothes you need. The car is then nevertheless the most popular way then to really make all the transports which are necessary if you have different homes. If you go there with laundry and shoes and coats and food. So yeah, trains very good. Cars are then the elements that will do the fine distribution. And in a general view, I think also in a critical view, I think all the regions you visit and you are going to live in, they are not, they cannot be, they cannot remain the way they are. As it's a little bit like in science, whatever you look at, it changes, and even more in tourism, whatever you visit, it changes, and it changes with people and with tourism dramatically. And it might even be a kind of soft tourism, a kind of yeah, nature-bound tourism, a kind of hiking tourism. But as soon as you live there and you work there, it has it needs infrastructure, and it generates more traffic. So this is what I could I must say from also looking at Switzerland.
Yeah, it's interesting how you pointed out the mobility factor, that not only what kind of leisures you are engaging in, but also how you reach them. So I think as architects, we have this potential of refurbishing or reprogramming spaces which are now in a penumbral area. Like, for example, train, like you've been talking. So train is one area where we are spending so much time, but because of its lack of facility or amenities, it makes it very banal and a place where we feel like we are wasting time. So yeah, maybe something, you know, where we can expand our idea of space and start reappropriating it in some way.
So you did this nice work about the non-stop landscape?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. I liked it. It's the Oriental Express, but just through landscape in Norway. Yeah.
Yes, yes, exactly. Yes.
Yeah, yeah. No, I like the idea a lot, and I dropped into one of those broadcasts on the Oriental Trail Express, and not murder on the Orient Express, I think.
Yes.
Yeah. So this is a nice idea which has been practiced quite a long time, to have the train as a luxury stay, and on the same time a kind of a cruise possibility, a cruise train instead of a cruise ship. Yeah, yeah.
What we found really interesting in this whole development of the train is whenever a country wants to develop further, they are going for high-speed train. But is there a need to invest so much, also like financially, but also through wasting so much of carbon emission in such way? Why not bring back something which was already there and utilize it and use our capabilities to maybe enhance the experience of the travel? And because also train gives you a distance from the landscape where you can sort of regulate the contamination. So
no, I think it's a very nice idea, and to my knowledge, even the night trains are kind of rediscovered again because it became so cheap to fly, they have been neglected, and there was no demand for it anymore. But now it is again back due to CO2 efficiency. It's back on the agenda to have night trains also. And the slow move is of course, if it's a holiday vacation train, then it's luxury to be slow, yeah, and to see very close the landscape passing by in order to enjoy it. And in mountain areas even more. So it's kind of this panoramic trains, which there are also some in Switzerland, which are called panoramic trains, where you can look at the mountains with the glazed roofs, and to sleep there and to have it as a kind of hotel, it's quite nice. Yeah. I'm not so sure about double height trains, looking at all the tunnels which are necessary to go through in Switzerland. This would not work. And also electrification cables and posts would have been adapted for all the distances. But the ground idea is very sympathetic and strong. Yeah, I like that.
Yeah, maybe it would be also interesting to have this technical difficulty in your experience where you feel that you're going through a tunnel instead of, just when there is a metro or a high-speed rail, you go inside a black hole and then you come out. But here you feel that, okay, there's a mountain and then a landscape. And maybe it's a good exemplar also to follow in other countries to how you engage your people, and where do you take them?
Of course, then there should be maybe more tracks in order that the high speed still could work for those who commute, and the scenic tracks will be used for those who enjoy. But however, it would be best if there would be both possible on the same track line, because it's also ground consumption which goes with it. But nevertheless, I like the idea a lot.
Yeah. It's quite interesting how there is a survey which says that people don't like to wait on the stations. So if we have a lot of train also on the same track, but you spend more time in the train, then they are comfortable even traveling for longer hours. So maybe that gives a way to...
Nice, yeah.
Well, wherever people are moving to their second home, they also leave a place behind, probably a city. I was wondering if maybe it's interesting to discuss the effects on what people leave behind, and in particular, what that does to a cultural landscape. So all kinds of cultural institutions are usually based in the city. Does that mean that there should also be a more localized kind of cultural landscape that accommodates going into the countryside while still having some kind of touch point of the city of culture, if there is such a dichotomy at all?
Yes, if they are not too remote and too singular, it might lead into kind of detached cultural events, but also detached cultural institutions also, and even a broader kind of culture. Then, also speaking from the point of Switzerland, we had this, and also involved in it actually, we had this kind of multiplication of, for instance, of museums in Switzerland since 20 years. Many private founders built small museums which are not only in Zurich, not only in Basel, not only in Bern, but also in places like Appenzell or like a museum in Davos, and these are small institutions and privately financed, both of them, for instance. And of course, they contribute to the cultural life of the the villages or the cities around, and enrich the whole scene. But of course, also they are separate efforts. You know, the city museums, for instance, they did not shrink in the meantime. They all expand nevertheless, although they are these satellites or these little stars are not belonging to the same planetary system, but it has not led to kind of a balance between countryside and cities, but rather in a kind of also multiplication of institutes with the advantages, of course, that there is more cultural life going on, more exhibitions being shown, more artists having an exhibition, more interesting curators being at work. I think it's beautiful, it's wonderful, but it's in the same tendency as this semester of yours has also the focus or the prospect on what are we doing in the future with our world, with these greenhouse gases which make the whole planet heat up. So the last 30 years have been wonderful years with so many possibilities, but almost everything we contribute to it for more freedom, more culture, more sports, more travel, more space to live, and more possibilities to make sports. Almost everything contributed to more, and also more greenhouse gases, and also more climate change. This is the bitter truth I have to tell to the youth of, not only in Switzerland, but also the Berlage Institute.
Yeah, in Norway we have seen this. The oil economy not only helped develop the country, but also this abundance economically made them build a lot of new museums and libraries and in different cities. And of course they enriched the cultural scene, as you mentioned before, but they were also used to as buildings to initiate new urban developments, expanding the city and the speculation on these new areas of the city. No, you talked before about to reduce the scale in the second homes. Do you see this strategy relevant also in the way architects operate within the city, not only to respond to the demands of, let's say, investors or the construction of new cultural institutions, but what's the agency of the architect to maybe to reduce the scale, if that is a possibility?
Maybe I didn't get the question too precise, but
I meant,
Could you explain it again? Because acoustics are sometimes a little bit a problem. Just in a very short way, the question would be, how could architects contribute?
If we can reduce the scale of the buildings that we build, basically, or that we design.
I think the scale, it has. I think the scale has two sides also. The scale, if it's a bigger scale, it can contribute to have more density and have less, and have more community and have less energy loss and use less energy to heat it, to cool it, whatever. So, for instance, very big buildings like the Prime Tower, all of glass in Switzerland, which we built, is not having too bad energy numbers because of its mass. So this is, but it's always mass and scale is always to be set in relation to how it is used, how many people use it. Is it just a big building standing there and kind of used by few people, or is it used by many people? And coming to the small scale, which is always sympathetic, and we Swiss like the small scale a lot because small is beautiful in Switzerland. Everything which is small is beautiful in Switzerland. This is a kind of common term, but it has to be put into the relation of not only the less impact on a landscape. Of course, it has then when it's smaller. It has also been put into relation to like the surface of the space which is generated is sometimes very is a problem because if it's having a small surface, it uses much more energy to have the same, to be heated and to be cooled. And it has also then the problem that because it's so small, it uses much more ground. If it's a one-story building, and you live there, it uses the same ground on Earth as when it's 2-story high, 3-story, 4-story, 5-story. You can kind of economize the space occupied on the ground of the Earth's crust. If you build higher, so there is a kind of balance between what is less having a less bad impact on the Earth, even by building adequately high. I'm not talking of slim towers. I'm talking of about 4 stories, 5 stories to be more ecological than just having a small building which has 1 story and occupying the space built for, which is heated and cooled on the surface of the Earth, which is 1-to-1 then. Yeah. Is it clear what I say? It's also, there is no simple answer, but there is a good side and a bad side in size, in big size and in small size. And I think there is something in between which is better than the huge sizes and better than just having a small hut in the countryside is not only a good thing, you know.
Maybe to add to this, because public buildings are usually also symbols of the city, or is it a national symbol? So they start being for people. They start designing for people. They design for national or symbolic competition almost. And I think that has a lot to do with scale. That's why the Eiffel Tower is not 2-story high. I think, and so it's about the future. It's also about not only changing our energy to clean energy, but it's also becoming frugal. As part of a project here in the Berlage, we were lucky enough to go to Japan before COVID. But there, after the nuclear was not an option anymore, the whole cultural shift was towards being frugal, being a more frugal economy. So all causes were, there was a consciousness of what they would consume. And I think space is consumed in a very overwhelming way. And I think there's I don't know what's your take on that. Yeah, on that. And you talk about scale, but then how can we do national symbols without this scale, perhaps?
Yeah, look, as I said before, I'm not against big scale, and we built a high-rise in Switzerland, actually more than one, and I think the need for identification, like the Eiffel Tower, is something which is also a global thing. Nevertheless, I think Eiffel Tower is standing, and we are still building a lot. I think I think what we should do and what we should try to do, we architects, we should become a broader view on the things, and also including what you say, that building something where people can identify is important. Although all the architects want to do it, and maybe just there's one Eiffel Tower and it's 150 years old, even older. So I think to have a clear look at what we really need is very important and also very difficult, and to get this broader view. And you're right. We cannot save the world by being frugal. We are too many, and we also cannot save the world only by sufficiency. We have to find new ways, and this is what I saw in the semester this morning when I looked at the videos, which impressed me. I must say so. Compliment to all of you. And how you did that, how you explained that, I liked it a lot. It's a high standard what you deliver there. Compliment also to
Thank you.
To all of you, the students, and also your teacher. Great stuff. But coming back to this bias, to this better balance between being sufficient and having, as architects, to be creative, because we gain our money by being creative and finding solutions for people. And you know, you said room is a luxury. Actually, room is also basic. It depends on how much room we have, but maybe flying is a luxury. And crew and making a ship, making a cruise, shipping is a luxury. But having a home to live, to work, to sleep, to eat, to have the temperature which we can withstand, which we can live in. This is actually not luxury, but this is basic. So having a second home is luxury. Yeah, but having a lot of space is also luxury. And there is no easy and no simple answer, but having to think about how can we architects provide space for a still growing community, for still growing population. And I think we have to have a closer look, and this is, I think, very important. How are the buildings built? There is gray energy involved. How is it transported? Does it have to be dismantled again, as I saw it today in one of your works, or can it be as good that it can stand there? Otherwise, dismantling is also being again combined with energy and traffic and noise and infrastructure needed, and so I think we have to look at how can we produce architecture, because we can, as some of you also thought about, if we use wood, we can even make a kind of storage of CO2 within wood, at least for the lifetime of the buildings. We can make a CO2 greenhouse fixation for a while within wood, as long as the wood can regrow within time. So we cannot chop all the woods down, all the forests down, and then not So this has to be done in a circle where nature can recreate wood, and we have to think first of all, and Norway is exemplary for that. Norway has, I think, electricity is provided by 95% with water power, which is very, very good. And nevertheless, looking at the numbers of the whole energy consumption, all in all the fuels together, coal and more gas and oil, Norway is not so good. Even less good in Switzerland, which is not good also. But also we have also water power, but not so much as Norway can provide. So nevertheless, I think we need their inventions, technical solutions, which are on the way, which have been proved in the last 15, 20 years better and better with solar power, which became more efficient and less expensive. And I think we have to use also the way of heat pumps, which give a lot of efficiency by using the warmth of the earth, heat earth, brine water heat pumps, which in combination with the photovoltaic panels, they are doing a real smart job. I think this is one of the ways which have been experimented and proved that they work and they can be very energy efficient. And I think energy is really still a kind of key to what climate change is now doing to our Earth. And I think we also have to do, or to think about and to recalculate how can we insulate our houses good enough so that they do not use so much functional energy. And I think what I'm claiming here in Switzerland is as good as I can is we need facts and figures. We really need a kind of life circle analysis from the building to the use, to the lifespan, and then even to the dismantling at the end. And with all the factors to really judge what we are doing in order that we do not end up in a kind of blind activity, which is even doing, doing much more damage than we wanted to achieve. We want to solve we want to solve problems. We want to save the world, and actually we do not have yet the very good tools which can give us in a short, without being too complicated, just kind of indications of all these huge mountain of data, gray energy, usage energy, dismantling, and also how much can insulation in different thicknesses provide help that we do not spoil energy for heating. So I think there is kind of a huge enlightenment necessary in all our heads, and some figures we can keep in mind, but there are so many data which are needed that we need tools and they are not yet on the market. They are not yet available in a way that we could simply use them. But it's not rocket science, and I can't do it as an architect and as a bad mathematician. I can't. But I think there we should ask our colleagues, our engineers, our whoever has the data to help us to have a clearer sight on what we should do and what we should avoid to do.
In this plight for a rational approach to the climate problem, a beautiful message. I think we would now have to end this conversation. I would like to thank you very, very much for joining us today and providing some really nice insights and really nice comparisons between Switzerland and Norway. And we've enjoyed your company very, very much. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Have a nice day.
You too.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Okay, we are going to start our third and final session of the day. It's titled, Hello, Oana, can you hear me?
Yes, I hear you well.
Good, nice to see you again. I will quickly introduce you to those watching the live stream and those in this room. For our third panel, we have Oana Sinescu joining. In addition to running her eponymous design studio in New York, Oana has for several years been teaching at Harvard's GSD. Most recently, she co-led a multidisciplinary design course called New Spaces of Justice. Her broad interest and experience that defies the traditional boundaries of architecture will no doubt help us have a fresh look at tourism as we discuss its prospects, especially in regards to working tourism. So I will quickly also introduce the theme of this third conversation, which we call an itinerary in line with our travel agency theme. So this is itinerary 3, an itinerary for prospects for working tourism. One of the chief concerns regarding tourism in Norway is the unequal distribution of tourism-related activities across the country and throughout the year. One way to combat this is to position Norway as an ideal country for working tourists, a frame within which the attraction of visitors from educational and professional backgrounds will lead to relatively long stays with relatively high expenditures. The rise of remote working means that working tourism could indeed establish itself as a meaningful and economically fruitful niche across the country and indeed throughout the year. What role does architecture play in providing the right conditions for working tourism to settle? What kind of accommodation do these workers need? How do they entertain themselves when they are not working? And what is the relation between the city and the countryside in this new vision of Norway? In this third and final panel, we have 5 students joining. It's Theodora, Marianthi, Santiago, Hao, and myself. And I'm now handing the mic to my co-host, Michael Chia.
Thank you, Steph. Hi, Oana. Maybe something, a side note. Before I was a student here at the Berlage, I was let's say a prospective student sitting in room K, listening to your lecture. If I remember correctly, you presented 2 projects, the Plus Pool and your graduation project, which, if I'm correct, a bridge in your home country of Romania. I was wondering if you could reflect on these 2 projects in a sort of a context of tourism. I can really imagine these projects, if realized, they're quite small or specific in scale, but they can have like this ripple effect towards a local economy. So maybe if you could share a few thoughts on that in light of the projects these students have been working on in Norway.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, thanks for having me. It's been literally a year since I was there physically, so it's nice to be there again. It's interesting because the project in Romania, we just recently got the funding approved by the European Union a couple of months ago, which is really exciting. And it basically serves this dual role. On the one hand, it has a huge role with regards to the infrastructure of the city and mobility and how reconnecting or restitching the city together. But on the other hand, we are under huge pressure and we receive constant reminders from City Hall, the mayor, and basically everyone who's part of it, to make sure that it does become not just a piece of infrastructure, but also a point of attraction. The city itself is a through city, so people drive past it or through it in order to get to the mountain. So they drive under that bridge. So the hope is in a way to go skiing or doing extreme sports to the mountain. So the hope is in a way that becomes a catalyst that has then economic repercussions. And it's fascinating in that sense to see how huge that pressure is on the city. It's a formal industrial town, and with current huge unemployment rates, as many of those towns are. So there's a lot of pressure in that sense, and you're trying to balance it out between, the one thing the mayor told us on day one was it needs to have a bungee jumping. funnily enough, the European Union would not approve it if it starts having a bungee jumping or things like that that count as entertainment, because you have to frame it under infrastructure or mobility kind of type of project. So we've been constantly toying this line between locals and contributing to the local population and providing things that feel like they belong, that are done for the city, while also becoming a point of attraction that allows people to keep returning to. I think this issue of why would I return to it, why would I go back, is something that we've been toying a lot. And in addition to that, it's just handling, the political pressures of not making a spectacle out of it. In the case of the funicular, this bridge that you're describing, it is already a spectacle. It is half a kilometer long and 30 meters above the ground. But there is this dire desire at times in the eyes of some of the people that we work with, or in the eyes of politicians, right? The need for, whether it's eye candy or whatever you want to call it, to create more of a spectacle that maybe I would hope would be necessary. So I think in that sense that the project is trying to do some of the things that you guys are trying to do over there. So I've been actually paying closely attention and really appreciated the video and all the project presentation. I think it's fascinating too, because we can project, of course, and I'll stop talking in a second. We can project, of course, and we can hope to instigate certain types of behaviors, but oftentimes these things are also unpredictable, right? And we've seen that with Bilbao and the Bilbao effect, which so many places have been trying to replicate, and not always for the better, right? I don't know that there is a second Bilbao or a similar situation that was able to thrive on architecture as a catalyst to such an extreme extent. But we can probably think of many projects that backfired in that sense.
Hello, Anna. Thanks for joining. So it's interesting that you mentioned the catalysts and also the idea of tourist and local, because we don't. Because we do not only approach tourism as an industry itself, but also the industries that are linked to tourism, and also talking about Norway, where they're also walking towards the loss of jobs maybe in the petroleum industry, because we're talking also about the idea of the post-petroleum era that's ahead of Norway. And so in terms of this, how do you think maybe to begin talking about the idea of working tourism as well? How do you think we should approach other industries that link to tourism and also offer many amenities maybe, or more experiences, or more leisure or working things to I would say, locals and tourists at the same time. So also focusing on the community, but also in the people that are coming to visit at the same time.
I mean, it's interesting. I really thought it was interesting in your presentation, right? This notion, and I guess in this last year, because of everyone being stuck somewhere, and some people choosing where they want to be stuck, others not having that luxury. This notion of the longer term tourism, I think, is quite interesting, and to me personally very compelling. I think partially because my entire life has been a form of long-term tourism, maybe in certain ways. But I think it raises some interesting questions. I think one question that came up for me is, when we think of tourism, understanding who tourists are and understanding the demographics a little bit better, because I think the notion of tourism comes, of course, with stigma, and we can see it as we can look at it as a good thing, as a bad thing, and there's locals, and I know it seems like in Norway it's a lot of actual locals traveling, but understanding also the demographics and the needs and desires, because I'm sure there's very conflicting things happening there. I find the notion of the long-term tourism compelling, particularly because right now, for example, I guess today you can't call it quite tourism, but the only form of travel today is a little bit of a more long-term one because of the quarantine rules and so on and so forth. And I do find there's something really nice about the slowness of that, but also the fact that at times you just have to kind of be in a place and kind of take that in. The one, I think, weird sort of maybe concern or thing that kind of kept wondering about was with the long-term tourists is, what does that mean for the local communities, right? Because then you're not dealing with people just kind of popping up for a weekend or 24 hours or something like that and leaving. But if someone stays for 3 months, they become, are they part of the community? Are they not? Do they expect the rules to apply to them? Do they understand the kind of, you know, let's say in Switzerland, the noise issues or all these kind of small fine-grained things that come from living in a place? And kind of, I think it's a fascinating thing to explore. And I think all these last generations, the last couple of decades, we've all been traveling. We've been constant tourists, although we probably look down on tourists too. But understanding this, you know, where do you stop being a tourist and where does more of a responsibility towards the community and the local community come in? I find that it's a fine line that's quite fascinating. I think it's fascinating also with regards to the kind of architecture spaces you inhabit and the needs you have that are radically different from, let's say, a weekend, a week, a month, 3 months, 6 months, and so on and so forth. And you know, at what point do you stop being a tourist and do you start being local or whatever you call yourself? And then the one other thing that it made me think of was, which I wonder if it is or would be possible, but I find quite compelling, is I don't know if you've ever visited a lightning field or if you're familiar with Walter de Maria's lightning field. It's in New Mexico in the United States, so it's this 1 kilometer by 1 mile grid of lightning rods. Really compelling, really beautiful, middle of nowhere. It took him 5 years to find a perfect site. The only way to visit the lightning field is by purchasing tickets, and then you drive to the nearest village. You can't drive to the actual lightning field. And from there, you're being picked up and you're being dropped off on site, and there's a cabin, and a really beautiful, massive wood cabin, over 100 years old. And you have to stay there 24 hours. You're being picked up again in 24 hours. You cannot pop up for an hour. You cannot come or leave as you please. And there's something incredibly beautiful about that. I mean, it's very much tied to the piece in itself, because in the 24 hours that I was there, we had sun, we had rain, and we had snow. And it was just incredible, and you understand how time plays a factor in it. But as you were talking about Andøya, if I said it correctly, the isolated island, and you know, the spectacle of the sky, I was wondering if there is, I think, certainly also these days, I guess, an attraction to the fact to things that we can, that are more exclusive, that aren't so easily accessible in a way. So I wonder if one can even play that up and make things even less accessible, force people to stay for certain durations of time and seeing that as an asset. I'm sure you guys have thought about it a lot, so I'm curious where you stand on it.
Well, in the case of Andøya, the remote island, I think all of the contributions are placed in that space, in that place, because they need that kind of remoteness, and they thrive because of the loneliness and the quite difficult accessibility, whether it is the observatory, which needs certain conditions in regards to light that needs to be quite minimal, the visitor center that just wants to see an unspoiled version of nature, or a royal palace that doesn't want any kind of intruders within royal walls. So definitely in that case, I think that was very much present. I was thinking while you were speaking and while you were mentioning the impact of tourists that stay for longer periods of time, I think one of the concerns that Norway has is that many people come to Norway for nature, which then means that they hardly earn any money of it, while there is actually quite a lot of detrimental impact on nature. So I never really thought of the detrimental impact long-term tourism can have on a community, but of course it kind of maybe outweighs the pros that Norway is looking for, which is economic profit in a uncertain future, as well as lessening a detrimental impact to nature. Well, maybe they outweigh then the effects on a community. I don't know, maybe this is something that others within the group also have an opinion about. But it's all, I mean, I guess that's what all this project has been trying to do, is to find a balance, or to explore what this balance is between all these different things to consider, really.
Hello, Anna. Nice to see you again. Coming back to this question about what is the difference between a tourist or a working tourist, as some of our contribution deal with this concept of working tourism, we agreed that the working tourists somehow reward the territory where they are hosted, while consumerist leisure is very harmful for the landscape and for the territory. So in a way, all of our contributions that are dealing with working tourism or traveling workers and try to assure that these people that are coming or are traveling to these remote places, in the case of Andøya, that are very pristine landscapes that we should all protect or prevent from destroying, as mostly all the other tourism has been happening in the last decades. And we just thought that the only way to visit these very special places is through working tourism. So this also reminds me of working visas, for instance, as that's a reality that we're facing. And so the question I think that we should all ask is, should only people that need to work there and it's like very necessary for them to go there, are they the only ones allowed to go there? Because in a way, tourism is a traffic issue. It's about who is allowed to go where, right? So in a way, what do you think about working tourism in that way, as a traffic control, or as a way to promote protecting certain landscapes, such as Andøya or these remote spaces?
I mean, part of me still likes to think of a post-work society. So, you know, what if I don't want to work or don't see it as work, or what qualifies of work? I think it raises all sorts of interesting issues. And in a way, you know, it becomes this thing again of sort of drawing a line in the sand. And is it becoming again a tool for discrimination, or maybe, to extreme, if played up to the extreme? I think I'm always thinking, okay, who can take advantage of it, and then who can? And, you know, there's a whole series of people who are not able to work on their laptops from home. So are we just limiting drastically the let's say maybe even age group or type of people that are allowed then to visit certain places? And maybe that has to do with the definition of work, which is also interesting, and which I guess today even more so, right, where we all kind of live and work and get in this kind of weird kind of mess of a thing. I think can be fascinating. And the work visa thing, I mean, is the tourism work tourism visa is fascinating because there's already, you know, all these fascinating questions being raised with, I'm in Berlin right now, but I teach in the States. So the notion of a work visa or tourist visa or student visas, right, are kind of, I think, are being questioned or really being pushed to their limits these days, which ultimately is hopefully a good thing or a healthy thing. I mean, I think we got to be careful as we're moving forward, from the way I see it, in our desire to protect certain things, not to kind of build up more fences and more forms of gatekeeping. So I think the questions that you're raising too with allowing a community to open itself up to people or in a way inviting people in, I think those are really, really powerful and fascinating. And maybe, I think it was mentioned earlier, you know, we're talking about detrimental change to a community, then of course we're already, change is happening, and change is happening at so many different levels, not just in the last year, but as it's to come. So maybe it has more to do with how we can not control the change, because I think control we can only do so much, but how, I think the word balance came up earlier. So how can we be part of this change, how can we drive the change in the right direction and not be at the mercy of it? I think maybe that's one way of looking at it, because in the last year, right, many things happen in a very improvised manner overnight, just as an example. But some are to stay or might have long-term repercussions. And I think it'll be interesting to see then, can we actually be now more intentional about driving this change? In a way, that's what you're proposing, right? Like to embrace change. And I think that's actually a very smart way to go about it, embracing change and seeing it coming, anticipating it, and trying to be ahead of it, as opposed to kind of, allowing things to reach more difficult points. I don't know if that answers the question.
Yes, in a way. I mean, because of course one of the main concepts of working tourism is to extend the overnight stays, which you mentioned before. So as you extend these overnight stays, of course the impact is less, and that's the main difference with consumerist leisure, that they just have short trips where they just come for 1 or 2 days, jump off a cruise ship, and then jump on again and go to the next destination. So in a way, I think we all do believe that there could be a balance, but we could also aim to at least extend the overnight stays as a ground point, at least. But I don't know.
I mean, maybe one way of looking at it is one thing that's happening, this notion of on the one hand, I think this last year and with all this isolation and everything, on the one hand, I feel everyone is kind of closing in and closing the gates, closing borders, and so on and so forth. On the other hand, I think the limits of these abstract notions are also being challenged heavily through the fact that some people, ended up being tourists for 12 months or ended up just being stuck in a place. And historically, right, the tourism visas usually go to 30 days, maybe 90 days at certain places. And I think if you're thinking then working tourism, what is that timeline? What is that time frame? And it's one thing to say 2 days, and it's another thing to think of a week, a month, 2 months, 3 months, 6 months. Like, how does that happen? And I think it's interesting then to maybe overlap that with just let's say in Norway, maybe the seasonality can play a big role. Does it happen then people come in winter and leave in summer, or the other way around? But ultimately it hits at the heart of so many of the things that are happening today, which is the bureaucracy, right? And kind of the judicial or kind of legal framework under which we're all moving on this world. And or living in a place in this world. And I think that's what's really fascinating about it. And the one other thing that struck me watching the video and listening to some of the presentations on the things that you're describing, and what I find really interesting is this is a really great example of, I know you're raising the question of how can architecture participate in it, and I think architecture has its role, but this is such a great example of kind of the issues that we're dealing with today being at the heart of a very multidisciplinary situation, right? There's no single, let's say, industry, or the tourist industry can solve it on their own, but no single, let's say, industries can solve this on their own. So in a way, it needs to be a concerted effort between a multiplicity of industries, and that's what I find really fascinating, because I think the magnitude of the issues that we're facing as societies, including climate, can only be tackled in that way.
Hi, everyone out there. Thank you for sharing. I think after the economic transition from the petroleums to the tourism industry, I think the work related to the tourism will become like dominant, of course. And I'm wondering, is working transitions impact the other industries or the Norwegian landscape? For example, for the tourism attractions, the most popular one is in Kvitfjell, and this place become dominant and spiraled by the second home. And because these situations and the distributions of the timber industry were also very close to this place. So I'm just wondering, how do you see when the tourism industry increased, what the other industry might be affected, maybe in either it's a good aspect or a bad aspect?
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear you very well. Could you just, I heard so a little bit in between. Could you just repeat or summarize it, please?
Yeah, is that okay? Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm just thinking because after the economic transitions from petroleums to tourism industries, there must be a lot of the workings related to tourism will be impacted. And for example, like the Kvitfjell, Kvitfjell is one of the popular attractions in Norway. And because of that, the timber industry, which is close to the Kvitfjell, becomes very popular in the corridor between Oslo to Kvitfjell. And the other, my personal experience from Taiwan is that the homestay buildings become like the dominant landscape in the countryside. So my question is, how do you see after the tourism industries rise, what the other industry will be impacted, and also the landscape in Norway? Thank you.
I mean, you guys are asking really tough questions. I guess it's a good thing. Well, I'm drawing. I'm trying to draw again of the, let's say, situation back at home in Romania where, let's say, once the industry that was the foundation of certain cities completely died down, very few cities were able to rebuild themselves or reinvent themselves on a different type of industry. The ones that did do it, so actually mostly so on tourism, and that's very much maybe a local condition too, because that's the thing that you have to offer most, actually also nature. But it's amazing to also then see the kind of life that tourism can breathe into a city. And I think that's why I brought up earlier the point with how that affects local communities, because at times it does feel like a breaking point, or it's really quite fascinating. I mean, with regards to the plus pool, for example, or you know, we draw a lot from the Highline project in New York, and that's a good example of a project that caters both very much to locals and became a huge tourist attraction and a huge catalyst for an entire area. So retail, tourism, entertainment, all those things exploded along the length of the High Line. Housing, architecture, you have literally everyone right now having a little thing, for better or worse, along the High Line. But I will say there was something really nice experiencing the High Line during the pandemic, because it was the only time you could actually run around the High Line or experience it in its emptiness, versus during the normal run of the city that would, you know, it's always completely full and completely overrun. But with the Plus Pool 2, we're doing always economic impact reports, and we're trying to understand or project to a certain degree how many jobs do you create, but then also what are the reverberations for a neighborhood, because they can be quite tangible. So I'm not necessarily sure what that means in the case of Norway, but I will say I also always come back to this notion of a post-work society, because I think our constant attempts to just replace one job with another at one point reaches its limits. And there's some really good examples or studies on that in cities where industry was not being able to be replaced, and instead you had sort of people form collectives or communities that just found a new or a different way of life and or thinking of work.
Hello, Anna. Continuing what you said about the impact on landscape and city, it's very interesting to see how Norway, and in particular Oslo, is trying to become a cultural hub and the tactics behind it. So right now there is an overabundance of cultural buildings being built while they're being moved from their historical building settings into new facilities. And that leads to having new buildings, but also buildings that are left empty. And this is a phenomenon that goes on. And if we think of cultural tourism as maybe something in between leisure tourism and working tourism, but also something that leads to the high yield, low impact effect we are seeking for in this thesis, how would you characterize these tactics of overproduction of buildings in order to become a cultural hub? Is this a tactic that can be successful?
I mean, my assumption is it's being done because there's hope that it would be successful, but I do think, you know, I think my naive self or my idealistic self wants to believe that we're at the crux and we have some important choices to be made in the coming years. And those choices have to do with the responsibility. And yes, there is a responsibility towards, let's say, jobs and profit at the end of the day, but there is also a responsibility towards the planet and the environment altogether, right? And in that sense, I do believe that in the kind of second or third life of buildings, and I tend to find that condition to that constant search for the new is not always for the better. It doesn't guarantee anything. I'm sure you probably know it, but because you're in the Netherlands, but I think Amsterdam, right, is cataloging buildings and cataloging elements of buildings, public buildings. So in case anything it needs to be demolished, elements are being reused. I thought it was such a fascinating way of thinking of architecture and looking at architecture as a series of elements of pieces that you can then either reuse in different buildings or recycle or so on and so forth. I mean, it kind of sounds like an insane job. Like imagine archiving in a way, structural or like construction or architecture. But I think it is a strategy in a way, or building buildings that can be undone and rebuilt in different ways, or the materials reused. I think there's such a compelling way of looking at things, and it seems maybe counterintuitive from a, let's say, construction point of view or developer point of view or profit point of view. But I think there's a lot more richness there. So I'd be a little bit less sort of interested in ridding ourselves of things that we have, but actually more so investigating how we can reuse and how we can find purpose in them. I think particularly because, you know, when I was so during the period of my thesis, or as I was kind of discovering architecture, studying architecture for the first time, was before the 2008 crisis. And then that I think that's where was the pinnacle of let's build the craziest thing, the tallest, the roundest, the squiggliest, the weirdest, and in a way then the crisis came, and it became so obvious how empty these things are. And I think in this century, this notion of superlatives is not that exciting, or not. It's not only that exciting. I think it's irresponsible. I think 100 years ago, during the Industrial Revolution, to kind of aim for, let's say, superlatives from many perspectives, the tallest or whatever, maybe made a lot of sense in terms of trying to prove ourselves. I think right now we know that we can build crazy things, and we have a lot of crazy things that we keep looking at. But the big dilemma, in a way, if they don't serve this bigger purpose of how can we live on this planet sustainable as a collective, as a global community, then what's the point? So in a way, this constant drive for the new or the spectacle, I don't think that necessarily. I think you can offer. I see it more as a political thing. It's easy to put that on top of any sort of political campaign. It's easy to show that as a result. But the things that actually drive communities, that actually impact communities long term is the work that oftentimes is invisible and that oftentimes is less, splashy, but takes a lot of years and years of actual true work. And we're talking in very abstract terms because I don't know the specifics of the thing you're describing, but in a way, I think we oftentimes lead the conversation in a distracted manner, and I think that that's true for architects too, where we're looking, okay, how can a new building solve something? And I was just looking actually the other day at the Esqueleto Hotel in Brazil, and might have said it wrong, so the Skeleton Hotel that's in the Amazon, and it's this. I call it gorgeous because I'm an architect, but this huge brutalist structure that was never completed and never actually used as a hotel. And you look at it and it's surrounded by the beautiful forest, and you're just thinking like, where did things go wrong? Because just looking at that one image, you're instantly thinking it should have worked. Where did things go wrong there? Why did it never take off? And I think there are these instances, right, of just architecture becoming just an empty shell of an ambition or a vision, but that was distinctly out of sync with their actual times or needs or context.
I keep thinking a bit about the working tourism, so I'm going back to that topic, and I was thinking in the last year especially, I think we've seen that the people we've relied on most were the essential workers, for which working tourism maybe is something quite different from what I think the people we were talking about earlier, the kind of office workers, creatives who can quite easily travel the world to do the work that they want to do. But I was wondering, how can we rethink then what it means for those who can't travel far away from their work to still have some of that experience, or still have some of the benefits maybe of being able to work while also having a different kind of experience that allows for leisure maybe more than it would do in their normal lives. Or I mean, there's something quite elitist about thinking about working tourism, and I think that's something that I think we can't ignore in this discussion.
Absolutely, and I think it's visible now or it becomes quite visible and tangible in many places in the world. So everyone's leaving now San Francisco and moving. I can't remember what the cities are, but again, it's always just a certain spectrum of the population who's able to do so, right? And I wonder why we have to call it, or I wonder if it always comes down to how we conceptualize it. So I wonder if it needs to be conceptualized as working tourists. So what working tourists could also mean is that but that might defeat its very purpose. The one option would be, let's say, if you are a nurse, that if you go to a place that you're also able to just, I don't know, find some way of working there, even if it doesn't imply working on a computer, right? Because I assume, basically, or let me ask you this way, does working tourism imply working on a computer from somewhere far away, essentially?
Well, yes. I mean, I don't think it has to be that. I think I saw, this was maybe a painful example, but it was a nurse that was staying in a hotel because she was caring for COVID patients, and she didn't want to spread the disease, which is, of course, a very different kind of, in a very awful way, you could think about working tourism, but of course that's also not what I mean. I'm just thinking of, as we maybe move towards a world where loads of people do leave the city for longer periods of time, that also leaves space and opportunity maybe to use that for other people who can't do the same. And I agree, it's the concept working tourism that maybe the phrasing needs to be rethought in that, or it's not necessarily about the traveling, it's much more about finding a different kind of rhythm or enjoyment in both work and free time.
Well, you know, it just begs the question then, are seasonal workers essentially doing work tourism? Or what does it depend on how much leisure time they have?
I mean, I guess in a sense, yes, they are working tourists, but as you say, when they come back every year, then that also changes the...
I mean, I think Europe actually does have a lot of that kind of seasonal, those kind of seasonal workers traveling around and doing quote unquote tourism from that sense. I think the reason I'm bringing that up, I keep coming back to the notion, does it have actually anything to do with work? I mean, yes, it allows one to do the work from a different place, but I wonder if it would be a little bit more simple or honest to just talk about the you know, long-term tourist or the duration. So kind of splitting it into something that's between a permanent resident and between a, you know, 30-day tourist, something that's in between. Because this notion of work, you know, I instinctually, of course, thought of, oh yeah, with my laptop I can work from anywhere, and I'd love to be in Norway actually for 3 months if possible. But then, of course, that is a very elitist, a very limited way of looking at things, because there are people whose life is going to places, working for 3 months, and then going back home, and so on and so forth. And I think this notion at the moment we call it work, or the reason work visas exist essentially is so one can be taxed, right? So I wonder if in this notion of so I guess what I'm trying to say is I think it needs to be just clear, what do we mean with work, and where does it fall into the kind of larger spectrum of these kind of bureaucracies or labels? Because is it about working locally and therefore contributing in a way to the community, and or being able to participate in the community, or is it more so about being able to be in a place physically for a longer duration of time, with the, let's say, with all the luxuries of being a tourist? And by luxuries, I mean the ability to not pay taxes in that specific place or something like that, right? Up until a certain point. I mean, I think that's what makes the difference between a tourist visa and a work visa. In one place, you're allowed to earn money locally, and in the other one, you're not. But the way you're using work visa, it's less about earning money locally, right? You're working technically somewhere, potentially somewhere far away. Do you know what I mean? I think there's this distinction there toward this kind of, on my end at least, lack of clarity with what we mean with work tourism, and do we mean just a specific, you know, narrow demographic, or is it looking at a broader variety of types of, let's say, work tourism or types of tourists?
I think it could be also like a combination of these things. So somehow we not only focusing on the season, on the seasonal worker, but in general having this general idea, I think, of even the Norwegian people, for example, even locals moving to their second homes and their, you know, like holiday houses, as we call it, second homes, to work from there. So somehow, yeah, it's like, I would say, in engaging maybe all of these like different kind of aspects of work in as well as leisure at the same time, somehow. But yeah, I think from now on we maybe have a new type of this working tourism. So maybe people come at a place and they work from there because that's the only way they can work anymore. So only through their laptop. So they decide to go for 3 months to stay, for example, in Norway. And we have some, maybe another type, a new type of maybe working tourism, I would say.
I mean, I think the language or the label around this can be quite interesting too, for better or worse. And I think that's where work tourism can be misleading or can mean different things to different people. It's always fascinating in the US. You're typically, until you're a permanent resident or until you're a citizen, you're called a resident alien, which I always thought was kind of cool, actually. But eventually you get to graduate from alien to permanent resident or citizen or whatever. But I think there's a strength there too, and that's what I mean with conceptualizing, so fully understanding, or it's not necessarily about narrowing things down, but I think just a sense of clarity with what we mean with that. And I think actually I'm not sure if it's about trying to mash all concepts together or trying to think of it as a new type of category. And I mean, I think the strength of something new or a new language around it could address the challenge and the kind of issues that come out due to the current context where we live in one place, we work in another place, where we're neither tourists nor locals, and we're kind of this weird thing in between. And I think it's about the gray zone where you go past either 30 days or 90 days into something longer. But I think the last thing I was going to say, I think maybe it would be, or the one thing that I keep coming back to is thinking, okay, who are tourists, and are there different types of demographics or case scenarios that we can sort of envision, sort of ideal case scenarios, to see how this plays out, not for just a specific spectrum of society, but really for a broader part of the demographics.
I think that's a great note to end with, Oana. Thank you very much for being with us. Some food for thought to continue on how to match this work and tourism. Thank you very much for joining us again.
Thank you for having me, and congratulations, everyone.
Well, I would just like to conclude if everybody can just take a seat for 1 second. So, well, again, I'd like to thank our 4 guests for joining us this afternoon and for patiently listening and engaging, given the difficulties within just our new reality of doing things on Zoom. I think that this was a very successful way to, as the kind of penultimate final moment at the Berlage. Now as we transition into our diploma giving ceremony, it's great. There are 490 Berlage alum. In about 20 minutes, we will have 503 over the course of 30 years. So this is very sort of 30 generations, a very special moment for us as an institution. So I am quite proud of that moment and proud for all of you. So thank you, everybody.